copy. And I'll just go to my slides. Here we go. And yeah, so obviously today I really wanted to look at helping you with performance boosting conversations. And I've got a little framework that I'm going to share with you. I think you'll find quite useful. And but just before I do that, there are a couple of things that I didn't get around to doing last week, and I think I should cover off on that. But first of all, is there any feedback from either of you regarding, you know, giving feedback, basically, which was obviously last week's session?
I had a go. I think I wasn't. I did more positive kind of feedback and tried to do that every day. Yeah, and I think I tried to be about the specifics of it as well, and it was good. It just added to discussion about, you know, the kind of tasks that we were doing and what we were discussing. Yeah. So it was good. It was good conversations. I guess for me, you know, I had to make sure that I allowed time at the end of the day to call and do that. And, you know, because we all work remotely, you know, there was kind of like I had to make sure that I added that to my kind of, you know, allow time to do that, which is good. It's a good habit to get into. But yeah.
You didn't get any strange silences on the end of the phone, Jareen?
No. That was, as I said, it just kind of started conversations about the specifics of, you know, tasks we were doing and stuff like that. So that was good.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, sometimes I get that feedback. People say, oh, I got a really strange look. And you know, I say, well, maybe it's because they haven't heard it from you for a long time or not at all. So, you know, that can happen, of course. And yeah, so I think, look, the point is really to get into the habit of it and, you know, just to find those opportunities moment by moment, day by day, project by project. And I think if you do that, you start to develop a good habit, and then of course, you know, when the time comes, and it will, where you've got to give constructive feedback, it might not seem like a very strange thing to do because you've obviously been giving feedback, albeit positive, for most of the time. So good. I'm pleased to hear that. So just keep that going. And I think what we're trying to do here is just build habits. So the idea is in Unit 1 is just continue to do that. So it's not about stopping that and starting something else, just continue to do that. And I guess let's talk about, there's a couple of models that I did want to share with you from last week that I didn't get around to doing. They're in the slides, but nevertheless, I think I should go through it. One of the best ways, I think, of framing feedback is the SBI model, which is very simple to remember and easy to implement. And it basically works like this. You talk about the situation, which shouldn't be difficult. So it might be what you might have heard, what you read, what you saw. It's the actual, so it describes the situation that you're referring to. So in other words, the person's aware of what you're talking about. So you might say, in this morning's meeting, when you said this, that's the situation. Okay. Now the behavior describes the behavior you observed, heard, or saw, or whatever it might be. So the behavior describes you know, what you saw. Now, so it might have been, so for example, you might say, as I used last week, you might say, oh, well, you know, at this morning's meeting, so I've situation, behavior, when you spoke up on the topic of X, that's it. So you spoke up on the topic of X. And then the impact is, this is really important because a lot of people don't actually understand the impact. In other words, this is the why. And so I might say in that circumstance, at this morning's meeting, S, when you spoke up on that topic we were discussing, B, I was really pleased because it needed to be said, you see. So I've now explained why I'm giving this feedback, so to speak. Or if it's constructive feedback, it might be something like this. You might say, I just overheard your call to a client or customer. So that's the situation. I noticed that you were getting a little upset in that interaction. And I'm concerned because I think perhaps it was a little blunt and we might have caused a problem with our client or customer. You see, so it's just a simple way of being able to frame feedback, both positive and constructive. And it's a really good process. The I is the strength of this model, in the sense that often we give the feedback. We do often talk about the situation. We hopefully talk about the behavior, not the person. And that's it. And we want to assume that the other person gets it. But I think the truth is, you've got to be overt about it and explain why you're giving that feedback. So that's a really simple model that you might like to try. And I'll be sending these slides to you, obviously, again today. So now I might just say with the B, this is where B for behavior, what you're trying to do there is specifically talk about what the person did or didn't do. So in other words, it's not about them as individuals, and trying to separate the person from the behavior is important. In other words, if I said to someone, I noticed that you were late in the last 3 meetings that we had, that's a behavior, rather than you're always sloppy on your timekeeping. Sloppy on your timekeeping is personal. Whereas talking about specific, 2 or 3 specific examples is more behavior-based. So it works really well, and I'd suggest you try that one next time you've got to give feedback. The other one that's really useful, and I know, Jareen, you talked about remote working, and I think this is very powerful, is that I think when you're doing, let's say that somebody's working on something and you're obviously not looking over their shoulder. So this is remote. And I did flag this last week, but I just wanted to be a bit more specific about it. So 3 key questions. So after something has been, this is very useful where there's a start and a finish. So someone's got a project to do, there's a beginning and an end. So this is basically at the end. So you can do this at the end of the project. You can actually do it in the middle as well. But the end that's why they call it an after action review. So you say to them, look, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions just to see how things went? So I've got permission now to launch into my feedback. But now I can say, well, what do you think went well? So we always start on a positive, and you'll find that some people have a lot of trouble answering that. But I think at the end of the day, it's good to get them to think about what went well, because even if something is a real disaster, there's usually something that went well in it. So it's good to start with a positive. And then you can say what could have gone better, right? So now I'm asking them for feedback around, and they might say, for example, I should have spent a bit more time talking to my client, working out asking a few more questions and not just launching in and then realizing that perhaps I was going down the wrong road. And then the final question would be, what would you do differently next time? And is there anything that another way of putting it might be, is there anything you could do differently next time? Or if you had to do this all over again, what would you do next? So this is a really convenient way to basically be getting feedback from people when they're working remotely. And the other great strength of this is that you are getting them to basically evaluate themselves, assess themselves. And that's good, because people don't argue with their own data. And if they think this is important, then if they say something, then they believe it because that's their information. So there's 2 really useful tools that you might like to try. And I think they work extremely well. I can only tell you that, because unfortunately this after action review has got a bad rap. And I think a lot of organizations now, they've taken it from the military, and what they've done is they've used it as a box ticking exercise, like a quality assurance process, so that we can ask people these sort of formulaic questions at the end of a project. But I'm suggesting that you use it as more of an informal feedback mechanism. It's far better, I think, that way, because otherwise it loses its impact if it's a box ticking exercise as such. So you can do this on the phone, you can do this via Zoom, you can do this, and let's face it, you're not really in a position to give feedback around the ins and outs of how it went because you weren't sitting there at the time. So it's a very relevant to get people to evaluate themselves. So I'll just stop there. You might have comments or questions. Okay, any, how did they sound? Do you think you could try those ones? Give them a shot. You can just, and I think the key is, I know people feel uncomfortable saying, going straight in. So let's just say, look, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions so I can understand how the project went? What did you think went really well? What didn't go well? Or what didn't go as well? And what would you do differently if you had your opportunity to do that again? And 9 times out of 10, they've got to do the same sort of thing anyway. So it's really good to get their commitment that way. So I think you'll find it works really well.
We do that just on projects with the whole team, but do you think it would be better if we did it on an individual basis rather than the team, or like both, or?
Both, Jareen, yeah, both. So if someone's working remotely on a project, there's a lot of information there that you know what the final product looks like if it's a report or something. But at the end, there's been probably a few trials and tribulations they've gone through to get to that point. So it's really about, using their experience to share with you. So I think in that sense, yes, definitely. But yeah, group ones are great as well. And I find that if you do this with your team or a group of people, they tend to be completely committed to whatever it is they've come up with, which is the psychological reason, because that's their information, it's their data. So if there's an agreement around the table that, we should do this differently next time or whatever, most of the time it'll be done that way because people have, it's their answer, it's their kind of information. So very, very powerful and not to be underestimated. So I assume you've had some good you've had some good results with that, Jareen, and with groups.
Yeah. And so because there's been a few projects that we have to do a similar process. So kind of then using those improvements for the next one has been, useful and always improving kind of our outcomes. And as a group, they've worked, but I haven't done it on an individual basis. So I can do that too.
Yeah, give it a shot. Okay, I'll go back to the slides. Okay, look, there are a couple of other things I did want to talk about, and hopefully these things don't happen too often because they're not very pleasant. But when you're dealing with a very difficult conversation, and I think we all have to at times, there's a couple of key principles that I think are really important to keep in mind. And one of those is that if the other person wants to argue with you, then you shouldn't go there. And the reason for that is that if you start getting into an argument with someone, you might win the argument verbally, but the point is, it's not about that, is it? It's really about, making sure that they listen to the feedback that you've given them. So there's 2 things that you can try there that I find really worthwhile. One is to say to the other person, look, I refuse to argue with you about this. That should neutralize that. Or if it's a smallish sort of nitty-gritty detail that's not really the substantive part of what you're talking about, you can say, let's agree to disagree, and you can move on from there. But the point is, you just don't want to get into an arm wrestle with someone when you're giving them what will probably be, quite it'll be obviously, constructive feedback. So don't argue with someone. Try to focus on the performance. And what I mean by that is just keep coming back to the behavior in the SBI model, keep coming back to behavior. Because at the end of the day, remember, you're only giving feedback for two reasons. One is to reinforce good, positive behavior for the future, or two is to change the behavior for the future if it's negative feedback or constructive feedback. So focus on the behavior. Don't get yourself caught up in issues around that. Just keep coming back to the behavior that you've identified. Remember, it's all about the future. And obviously the only reason that you're doing this is to try to amend behavior for the future. So often at this stage, people will want to wallow around in all the detail. They'll want to talk about, this happened and that happened. And some of that may well be relevant, but at the end of the day, it's about changing behavior for the future. And I guess I think it's reasonable to finish any conversation like that on a positive, in the sense of saying, look, I'm positive that you can remedy this next time. Now, why would you say that? Well, why would you be giving someone feedback if you didn't think it would change? In other words, it's quite reasonable for you to say that. But I think saying it is important because the other person needs to believe that you think they can do it. So I definitely feel that it's good to finish on a note like that. And I guess if it's a complex thing, you need to seek out the causes and keep asking questions until you understand the situation, and not to make assumptions too quickly, because often you don't know all the details sometimes. So that's where that magic question, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions so I can understand what's happening? That's where that can be very powerful, just to get to the bottom of what it is. Now, if you've got to have a difficult conversation with someone, some guidelines around that. Get straight to the point. There's no point in trying to chit chat or, try to put the person at ease. So for example, if you call someone away from a meeting, then they're obviously anxious to know what the meeting's about. So for you to start talking about their family and all the other things, it's not going to actually help, because it just lifts the tension. So the point is, just get straight to the point. The reason or the purpose that I wanted to meet with you today is because, right? So that's the second thing, explain the purpose of the meeting. So get straight to it. Now, once you've explained, now I would suggest that you think carefully about the words you use around the purpose of the meeting, because again, as I said last week, you can get yourself caught up in all sorts of problems there. And then the key for you both is to then encourage the other person to talk. So take the pressure off, ask them for what they think about what you've said, or have you got a response, or you want to comment on this. The sooner you can get them engaged in a conversation, the better. Otherwise, it's just you being in a monologue rather than dialogue. So you want the other person talking and hear them out. And that's the final point. The key thing here is not to interrupt the other person when they're speaking. Now, that's easier said than done. And the reason for that is that sometimes people will say things that are provocative. They'll say things that are incorrect. And you might feel the need to correct them, and you can. But what I need you to do is to park that and just hear what they've got to say. And then when they've finished, you can then say to them, there's two things that you said that I'd like to reply to. You see, now that's courtesy. If that person then interrupts you, it's quite easy for you then to say, well, look, I've just given you the opportunity. I'd appreciate the same opportunity, you see. So you're being respectful, basically, and also you want to get them talking, because it should be, as I said, a dialogue rather than monologue. Okay, now there's a couple of the difficult conversations. I think we'll launch into today's topic, but any comments, questions, observations around those couple of things. Easier said than done, of course. I realise that the heart races and everything happens, but unfortunately, we've all got to have those conversations at times, and unfortunately, not everybody will receive them in the right way. So it'd be wrong of me not to comment on those things. So, but I think if you can keep your cool, not interrupt, and be quite professional about it, you might be pleasantly surprised at how well these things go. That's been my experience. I think sometimes what happens is we make assumptions. We think, oh, that person's going to react really negatively, so I'm not going to say anything. How do you know that for a fact? Well, last time they might have, but that's last time, that's not this time, and you don't know. And it's a lot of it's got to do with how you conduct yourself. But if you sit there and don't give the feedback because you're worried about how they might react, it's actually not going to go away. The problem will continue. The behavior will be almost reinforced because you've said nothing, you see. So it's really important for you to take a deep breath and do that when you need to do that, if that makes sense. All right, let's talk about our topic today, and let's get into the 5 conversations framework. Okay, I might have mentioned last week, and I think surveys show and I did mention last week that many people, I think it's probably, you see everything from 80 to 60, but I think 70 is probably about reasonable from what I've seen. 70% of people are disengaged in work, and of those 70, 20 are actively disengaged. Now, that's not great because they're obviously trying to undermine what's going on. They're not just passively going through the steps. So the question then is, how do we get people engaged? Now, obviously, I mentioned last week that feedback does help engagement levels. There's no doubt about that. But also, what does help engagement levels is your working relationship with each of the people that you lead. So it's really important to build that working relationship up. And the best way to do that, in my view, is a regular check-in. Now, I would say that when we're talking about commitments here, we might talk about a regular check-in once a month. Probably once every 3 weeks is okay, but once every 2 weeks is probably too much. Once every month, you get together with each person in your team. Now, the big question then is, what are you going to talk about? Because obviously, it could just, you could just end up talking about the work that you're doing right now, which isn't necessary because you'd be doing that anyway, I would have thought. So this is the framework that I think might be very helpful for you. Now, I developed this framework in 2013. I put this together and I wrote a book called The End of the Job Description, because The End of the Performance Review. That was my first book, The End of the Performance Review, because I didn't agree with performance reviews, and I felt that there was I couldn't find any research anywhere that demonstrated that performance reviews actually increase performance. However, there is research to show that if you enter into regular dialogues with your team members, you can gain, you can certainly improve the working relationship. That improves the trust level, that improves the engagement levels, that improves everything. But the question then is, what do we talk about? So I put this together and I'll share this with you, and of course we can have a chat about it. Just jump in if you've got any questions. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got 5 months. And in those 5 months, we are going to talk about a topic, which is in the middle. And then over on the right-hand side, we've got the actual content itself. So we might start, so in month 1, it's a simple conversation because it's really not about the weather, of course, but it's all about that person and their job satisfaction, morale, and communication. So what I strongly recommend that you do is that I would pre-warn people that you're having these conversations and that you give them some heads up as to what you're going to be talking about. One, it's courteous, and secondly, hopefully will give people a chance to prepare mentally for what they're going to say in these conversations. For example, the first question that I ask in the climate review conversation is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10's high, 1's low, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Now, that's a far better question than, how are you going in your job? And they say, good, and that's the end of it. By asking them to give you a number, and it really doesn't matter what number they give you, but let's say they give you an 8, or let's say a 7, we'll go for a 7. So they've given you a 7, then you're in a great position to say, okay, why 7? And now I've opened up a conversation with them, which could be a lot more meaningful than, yeah, everything's going fine, few frustrations, but now I can start to hear a little bit about why it's a 7. I might then say to them, is there anything that I can do, or do you think it can get any better than a 7? Because some people, 7 is as good as it gets. But if someone says to you, oh, no, it could be high, it could, and you could say, well, is there anything I could do or not do which would help you get from a 7 to an 8, except a pay rise? So it just opens up an avenue of conversation, which can be very helpful. And, organizations, all over the world spend tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on surveys online. And many, many people, as you know, are very cynical about this, because they say, well, nothing changes. No one does anything different. I've never seen the results. I don't know. And I would just argue that you and I, we should do this one-on-one. Why do we need to do this online? You might say, well, people are more honest when they're communicating online. Well, therein lies a problem. If people are more honest, then why won't they be honest face-to-face with you? That suggests that you've got to work on that working relationship, don't you? So it's a very easy conversation to have. By the way, each of these are designed to be about 20 minutes. If there's only about 2 or 3 questions for each, and I'll share them with you later. But really, they're not difficult, and it gains a life of its own once you're in play there. And then in month 2, and this, instead of starting with what people are not good at, how about we actually start with what they are good at? So this is the strengths and talents conversation. And how do I start that? Again, if I started my conversation by saying, what's your strength, or what are your strengths? You're going to get some blank looks, right? So that's not an ideal question. A better question is, what's the one thing that you enjoy most about the work that you do? Now, if I've pre-warned the person that that's what I'm going to ask them, then obviously I'm expecting that they'll come to that conversation having thought about that. Now, there's a high correlation between what people actually enjoy in their work and what they're good at, by the way. And what we tend to do is we gravitate to the things that we enjoy most about our work. Subconsciously, we probably spend more time on those things than we do on the things that we don't enjoy. So why are we doing this? Because we're trying to unearth what people's talents are. And then, so let's say someone says to you, I really enjoy the interaction with members of the public. And you reflect on that and you observe that they're actually very good at that. They probably are, because they enjoy it. There's a relationship between, it's based on the 3P principle. We practice what we prefer, and we ultimately become proficient in it. So the question then is around, what is it that we can do that might give you more opportunity to do more of that? Now, in the short term, there may be nothing. That's okay. The fact is, you've had a conversation about it. You're on board. You've identified their strengths. They've identified their areas of strength. And if and when the opportunity arises, you've got an opportunity then to either delegate something to someone, change their job description somewhat to reflect their strengths. So it's a really pleasant conversation, and you are starting on a positive spiral, upward spiral, rather than a negative spiral. So it works out really well. Then in conversation 3, this is more traditional around performance management. Again, I would ask people to come to the meeting having thought about this. So the question I might ask, or I do ask in conversation 3, which is opportunities for growth, is what's the one thing that you'd like to work on in the next 6 months? Now, that's not a wish list to send people off to courses and all the rest of it necessarily, although there might be some value in that. But at the end of the day, what you're wanting that person to do is to talk to you about something that they want to work in their own work performance. And again, if you just hit people with this at the meeting and don't ask them to think about it, they may have trouble coming up with something, which it shouldn't be the case, but often it can be. And so I might start and say, well, what's the one area that you want to spend a bit more time working on in the next 6 months? And then you can talk that through and why it's important and what benefit it's going to bring and all the rest of it. So it carries on from there. Now, in conversation 4, what you can see, there's a logic to this, because in conversation 2 and 3, you've been talking about things that they're either good at or things that they need to work on. So conversation 4 is dedicated to wrapping all that up into some sort of a learning and development conversation. So you might start in conversation 4 by saying, look, I recall you saying a couple of months ago that you really enjoyed that interaction with the public. And we did talk about opportunities there, and we said there wasn't much in the short term that we could do about that. But, in terms of moving forward, what might we do to perhaps give you an opportunity to do more of that? Is there anything that you can? So the learning and development conversation is not necessarily about courses. It could be about mentoring. It could be about explaining things to people. It could be it could be a lot of things. So, but the whole thing, again, if you look at organizations, they spend lots and lots of time, usually organized by human resources, where they do what's called a training needs analysis, and they send all these forms around to the organization, and then they come back and they collate them, and whoever wants to go to the most courses, all of those things are valuable. But why, again, can't we talk about it in our own way, one-on-one, and have a conversation about it? Because that's their development. So whereas conversation 4, learning and development, is about the individual, conversation 5 is about the workplace. So again, I want them to come to me having thought about some things that can improve in our working arrangements. So this is around putting ideas in place that hopefully aren't costly, hard to implement, and will require enormous, upheaval. I mean, if it's got those 3 things attached to it, there's probably a reasonable chance it's not going to happen anyway. So what I'm looking for is just continuous improvement. I'm looking for things that they can implement and they can use in their own way. And if I do that, there's a good chance that, law of averages, there's going to be something that's useful out of all that. But people understand that not everything that's mentioned in those conversations will necessarily be implemented. But the fact that you've had that conversation about that, I think, is really important. And it brings that person into your, the idea is you're not the only person that should be involved in innovation and continuous improvement. So I'll just pause there and just see. Yeah. How does that sound?
Well, I don't have any questions about it, but it's beautiful.
Oh, you're frozen. No?
Can you hear me?
Sorry. No. Sorry. Yeah, now I can. Yeah.
No questions around it, but you've framed it really, really well. It's beautiful. I'm gonna, be using that one. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the main thing, Natalia, is it gives you a theme to run on every 5 months, every month of 5 months for 5 months. And you might say, what happens in month 6? You just go back and do them all again.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
by the time you get to your climate review conversation the next time round, it's 6 months or 5 months. So it's like quite a while, isn't it?
Yeah, and I agree. I don't find like the surveys and the performance reviews very effective. So this is a really great model.
No, they don't work. And I think that you know, if you know, like a business like yours, Jareen, I'd be saying, if you do this, you don't need a performance review necessarily. And in fact, you know, because you're having regular catch-ups, you're having regular conversations with people. So not only are they getting feedback, not only are they sharing how they're going as well, I think also their levels of engagement and the trust and all the things that we've talked about, they go up too. So it has a lot of benefits. So I'll share with you some of the questions I've just gone through so it can get you started on each of those conversations. But quite honestly, you don't need a battery of 10 questions. You'll find that if you start off the right way, it just develops its own momentum. Some people are skeptical and they say, surely to goodness you couldn't do this in 20 minutes. You can have a really powerful conversation in 20 minutes and you can have a really useless conversation for an hour and a half, right? So it's really not about the time, it's really about what you're talking about. So I think, don't think for a minute that this is, when I say 20 minutes, I'm actually trying to you know, I'm underestimating that. Look, some of these conversations might go for an hour, but that might be because of your choice and because you're talking about some really powerful things and really useful for their own development. And so that's okay. But I mean, they're not designed for that. And the reason I'm pushing that is that this is another imposition on your time. But I can guarantee to you that of all the things that you could do in your working environment, if you have these regular, what I might call catch-ups, you will find it'll pay off big time for you. Don't call them check-ins, because check-ins implies that I'm checking up on you. They're catch-ups. And if people know that every month I've got my catch-up with Natalia or Jareen, it just happens. And I'll guarantee one of the things I'm going to show you some research just so that you don't, I'm going to show you, you know, a couple of surveys I did in the workplace to show you how powerful this is. But I think if you do it, you'll find that the other individual, the person that you're having the conversation with, will really appreciate that additional time that they have with you. That's not to be underestimated, because it's, you know, it should be quite a pleasant arrangement. It's not supposed to be difficult. Let me show you a couple of things that you might find interesting. I did a job for a large government department in Brisbane, and this was the IT department, and there were 500 people in the department, or in this branch, I think they call it, and the morale was rock bottom, absolutely terrible. This was last year, by the way, and I was asked to come in and implement the 5 conversations framework. Now, just to give you an idea, the trust was so low that we were debating whether the managers should be taking notes because of the suspicion about what those notes would be used for. So we set a ground rule and said no note taking whatsoever. So what we did, and what you're seeing on your screen now, I'll just put the other slide up there. You see, let's take this for, these are statements. So I did a survey at the beginning. So I sent out a survey online. There were 50 statements, 10 related to each of the 5 conversations. So it's all designed around that. And then this is an aggregate result in survey 1. So communication between management and staff is reasonably good most of the time. Righto, 50%. So that's an aggregate right across the business. So that wasn't too flash. At the end of the 5 conversations, remember, this is just 5 20-minute conversations over 5 months. We surveyed everyone again. Now, they couldn't remember what they'd, what result they'd given it last time, but you can see that's a significant improvement. So obviously that's a great improvement. My boss has talked to me about ways to improve job satisfaction. Well, 23 is almost doubled. So that's significant, isn't it? And, again, we're only talking about 5 20-minute conversations. Here's some more information. My boss has discussed my strengths and talents with me, 43.73. Now, you know that conversation 2 is about strengths and talents. So yes, you could say, well, surely that would go up anyway. But the fact is, I shouldn't need to, that should happen anyway. But nevertheless, it's a significant improvement, which is great. My boss has given me feedback on my strengths and talents. That's a good one, because that suggests that, when they had raised that in the meeting, that the boss felt comfortable, the manager, the leader felt comfortable to give them a bit of feedback about that. So that was good. My boss is aware of my strengths and talents. Well, certainly they are now, because we've had a conversation about it, but nevertheless, that's a pretty significant shift in a case of 5 months in a culture. Again, I have not received enough feedback from my work, from my boss. Now, remember, that's a negatively worded question or statement. So 36% versus 72. How good is that? Wow. Just 5 conversations. Because what a lot of these people said is, because I'm having these regular conversations with my boss, it's encouraging more conversations about other things that I wouldn't normally talk about. And one of those things is obviously feedback. So that's great. Again, I feel my boss is getting the best out of me in my current job. Now look at that, 43.72. Now, if you think about this, we're talking about 500 people. That would have an exponential, that would have a significant increase in productivity in that working environment as such. And I think this is the last one. I've discussed strategies to grow and develop my current role with my boss. Yep, that's improved as well. So that's great news. Here's some comments made by people. Questions are not intrusive and could be delivered in a friendly manner. They provide an opportunity to learn more about individual team members. Conversations help to break down barriers in communication, enable line managers to have more open conversations with team members. The 5 conversations framework has fostered more impromptu conversations in the team, e.g. conversations about what team members are working on. Overall, the 5 conversations assisted in improving engagement, trust, and relationships with participants. So there's some evidence for you. So if you're in any doubt, I would say, you don't need to be. So give that some thought. They work extremely well. Okay, keep going. So just to sum up there before we launch into a couple of other things is, I think the benefits are that it's ongoing. That's a big benefit. It's not a once in a year sit down. So it is a benefit. The benefit is also that it's open and direct without being confrontational. The benefit is it's flexible. You can do this you can do this anywhere as long as you have that conversation. So it can be done out of the office, it can be done in the office, it can be done going from a meeting, it can be done in a range of different ways. Another benefit is it's timely because you're actually, you're there at the moment and you know what's going on at the time, and it's not left to fester or whatever. That's a really important point. And finally, it's more relaxed because, I'm sure you've both been on the receiving end of a performance review. It's not a very relaxed process. Normally someone's taking copious notes. You're kind of reminding yourself that there's potentially a pay rise or not at the end of this. This is it's not a really comfortable conversation to have. Even if you're going really well, you still feel as if you've got to perform to some degree. So I don't think that's relevant. It's quite interesting, Natalia, because there's been a lot of interest in the States about the 5 conversations. As I understand, the often the performance review and a pay rise are usually in the same conversation, which obviously is not a good idea, because if you're talking about, if someone thinks, this conversation, this performance review is going to be it could result in a pay rise or not, that's not going to be a very conducive conversation, really. So I think, I've had a lot of inquiries from companies in the States who see some value in doing this. I don't know. Have you got any reflections on that? Is that true or not true? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so a lot of my friends here have mentioned that they look forward to their performance review just to find out if they're getting the pay rise.
Yeah. So it's not, and of course, you wouldn't look forward to it if you didn't. And
Yes.
I'm not a big believer in, combining the two. I think the conversations that you have should guide and inform that decision. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, if you combine those things, you're not going to have a really authentic, open conversation, are you? People are going to be they play their cards close to their chest, as they say, and it's not great. So I would just say, there you are. There's a framework that I know and I've proven works extremely well worthwhile thinking about. So I'll just pause because you might have a couple of comments or observations, and then I'll just sort of give you your homework. So anything that you'd like me to elaborate on, anything there that resonated with you, anything there that you're not sure about? Sorry, I did have a slide. I thought I had a slide in there of the conversations. Let me have a look. That's really weird. I thought I had. Oh, no. I must have left it out. Whoops. I might add that in. How's that? Never mind. Okay. Yeah. So any questions about the 5 conversations as a framework to have a regular performance and development dialogue?
I don't
Feel
think so.
comfortable with
it makes sense. We do the more formal kind of feedback process, but to kind of have that ongoing dialogue makes sense to me. And sounds like the questions are a little bit less are just structured in a nice conversational way too. So sounds good.
Yeah, it is good. It does work, and I'm pleasantly surprised at how well it works. And I think the reason is, I think one of the keys is if you let people know what you're going to talk to them about during, maybe the week before, to give it some thought, you're going to have a much better conversation. And, there's no secrets, there's no hidden agenda. You just want to talk about, their strengths, or you want to talk about their opportunities for growth, or whatever it might be. I think in your case, Jareen, if you can get that up and running, you may find there is no need necessarily to have a performance review once a year. I'd like to think that's the case, because most of these things have been discussed on the run during the year. But the reviews take up time. You've got to do preparation. They've got to do preparation. it's an impost on the business. It doesn't necessarily improve performance. Yes, it is a form of feedback, but then if everyone's getting their feedback on a regular basis, then why would you need to go through this? So, okay, I'll add another slide in there on the starting questions on the 5 conversations, and I'll send that out this afternoon. So,
just one question: any tips on keeping it to 20 minutes?
I think the key is to just mention that to the other person. So just say that this is only supposed to be a 20-minute conversation. I think if you do that, they're probably going to be a little bit more efficient in their responses as well. And it also means that it's a little easier for you to say, well, I guess our time's up and thank you. And that's that. So I find that I hate looking at my watch, during a coaching session, and I've now learned to take my watch off and put it on the table or something so I can see it. So, but look, the other side of it, Jareen, is if you feel that there's something that's raised that's really, meaningful, you don't have to cut it off then either. I mean, sometimes it's useful to continue because it's something that hasn't been discussed before and it might be quite relevant to everything. So yeah, I just think that if you clue people up, because it's respectful to the other person anyway to say, well, this is only 20 minutes. You can do them on Zoom, you can do them face to face, no drama.
And then the kind of actioning of the outcomes from them, do you kind of, does it end like,
yeah,
is that you just kind of integrate into the work processes, or like, do they often end up being just a lot of work in terms of the actions, or do you share it? I don't know.
I think they're good questions. I think that some of those conversations won't require any outcome. It's just a meeting of minds and an understanding. But there's true to say that there's probably action from your point of view and the other person, right? So I think what you do is you just, at the end of it, just summarize and just say, look, I'll do this if you can do that, or whatever it might be, and just do it that way. Now, because you've got a conversation coming up in the next month, I often like to go back and review that. So I might say, well, how'd you go with such and such? We talked about this last time. So it's like, there's the mechanisms there to follow up, and you should follow up. And when you get around to the second round of conversations, you can, if you can remember what people said, you can refer back to that. So, for example, someone might say, I rated my job description and my job satisfaction 5 out of 10 6 months ago, and now I'd say it's 7 out of 10. And then obviously you might say, well, what's changed? Or why has it changed? So it's fine to take some notes, but don't allow the note taking to just completely dominate the meeting, because it's not about note taking, it's about connecting. And in fact, this whole course that we're doing is about actually connecting with people. So really, that might sound a little bit fluffy, but at the end of the day, it's that connection that leads to the higher performance. It's that connection that leads to trust. It's connection that leads to retention. It is connection that leads to higher levels of energy and engagement. So it's very interesting that, you can try all sorts of things, but if you do this, it'll be as good. You saw the results. You saw the aggregate results. So it. Obviously that there's tangible evidence that it works. So. All right, and you can probably guess that homework is just simply to, here we go, where are we? There it is. It's just simply to And I don't give people onerous things to do because we're all busy, but I'm just suggesting that you get your catch up started and working. So start thinking about how you might structure that, and then of course get it in play. And then, maybe we can have a conversation about this next Friday and see how we go with that. All right, so that's it from me. So I'll send you out the recording. I'll send you out the slides. I'll amend the slides and just put a couple of questions in there that'll help you get those 5 conversations working. And I'll obviously send you a link for next week as well. And what are we doing next week? I just got to see. Yeah, conflict. So I'll be sending you out a little diagnostic to do as well. Should take you only about 10 minutes. And if you could complete that before Unit 3, because it'll guide and inform everything we do around the conversations around conflict in Unit 3. So, all right. Thanks, Jareen. Thanks, Natalia. All the best. Have a great day or evening in your case. Yeah. Thank you.
That was really great.
Tim. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next Friday. Cheers.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.